welcome everybody to HorseShow 360 podcast. I believe this is episode 17. We've got a real good one for you all today. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, HorseShow 360. Tune in on any of your podcast platforms that you tune into, and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well to watch full episodes. This is a really cool one because Mike, thanks for joining me. It's been a while.
Yes.
Mike and I have had many heated conversations about this specific question, and this is a good one. I have a feeling we're going to do probably multiple episodes on this topic over a period of time because I love this conversation. It's a good one. Anyway, the topic is what defines the definition of a sport, and is equestrianism, horseback riding, show jumping, a sport? I mean, it's a pretty simple question, and I think a lot of people have differing answers. There's different parts to the question, all of that. It's a good one. And actually, this topic came up for today, and I wish we had him on here, but I think he's in Europe right now. Ronnie Reimer did one of our previous episodes with us, and it actually came up in our conversation randomly about whether, he was saying that, horseback riding, and I think that he had a deeper meaning behind it, but in principle, he thought it was a hobby, not necessarily a sport, which I thought was pretty interesting, and I definitely strongly disagreed with. The analogy I think I gave is, my kid goes out there, he's 4 years old, Crew. He goes out there every day and plays various sports. Among those sports, I think, are ones that would come into question of whether they're a sport or not. Right, Mike, you and I have had this conversation. So a couple things that he does, and I'm going to read the definition of a sport first. And I think that this is actually where, Mike, you're going to get me, but I'm going to disagree with. The definition of a sport is, one, an activity involving physical exertion and skill in which an individual or team competes against another or others for entertainment. Okay.
Yes.
So, and it says team sports such as baseball and soccer. So that's let me see if there's another definition here. A human activity involving physical exertion and skill as the primary focus of the activity, with elements of competition or social participation where rules and patterns of behavior governing the activity exist formally through organizations and is generally recognized as a sport. So that's pretty cool, because I think that that's where we differ a little bit in definition of a sport. So I was going back to my son, Crew, and you can speak to your kids, Mike, as well in this part of the conversation. But he wakes up, he goes and plays tennis, he has a pony, he rides. He's learning to post and go faster and do all those things. He has a little mini golf set in the basement he likes to play with. He plays basketball, he plays tennis, he swims. So a wide variety of activities.
Yes.
So there's a couple of them in there, riding and golf. Okay. I think people could have in question, but the reason I use Crew as an example here is because you see the level of concentration and effort and skill and balance and all of the above, hand-eye coordination in those different sports and stuff, whether it be riding or golf or anything like that, that it takes to do something. And I know he's not old enough, but you and I have had the heated conversation about whether, Formula One drivers or race car drivers are athletes.
I've softened a lot on that, but continue.
You have? Because we started this conversation like a year ago, and you were like, they are not athletes. The car does the work. And I'm like, okay, let's hear your take.
No, but I've definitely softened. And I think with everything, I think with sport, often, I like multiple sports. I always have. I really like
But
participating
you're kind
in
of like a
sport.
bull in a china shop.
Yeah,
So
I've been
that's
a
where
little
your
aggressive at
take on
times.
sport comes from, just knocking people over and knocking them
Well,
out.
I'm Greek, I go.
Is that what they do?
Yes.
Okay.
Um,
It's all about
so,
feta cheese.
but for sure, the F1 comparison in terms of sport, there's so many. Even you, at the start of the show, you gave a couple different descriptions, but you know, I've looked at four different descriptions, five different descriptions. It's funny how sport is, um, basically spoke about in different terms. But I look at, the exertion side of Formula One. I'm really, and that comes up in most of the descriptions of sport. So I do understand that, but I was just going to say, when I talk to a lot of people, because I like different sports, and I say hockey, for instance, I never grew up playing hockey, but I love watching it and I really appreciate it.
Canadian. He's
And I
Canadian.
think it's the best live sport ever. But if I talk to somebody
Why?
that,
Just because like the fighting and stuff?
no, the speed, the
Entertainment. Remember
athleticism
that
of
word
it.
in entertainment in that definition? Hockey's
Well,
kind of
entertainment as
entertainment because
well.
they take their gloves off and just punch the crap out of each other.
Yeah, why not? Um, so again, when I'm talking to somebody that doesn't really know much about hockey, they're like, "I don't like that. I don't like hockey." I'm like, "So
Yeah, I
why
don't like
don't you like
hockey. I
hockey?"
don't like hockey.
Okay, but I would say to you,
I don't like baseball.
you probably don't understand it enough to appreciate it. And I think that that goes to a lot of things. And that's for me, F1. Maybe I didn't really know everything that goes into it as much as you appreciate F1 because you understand it and you watch it and you know what goes into it. So I made a knee jerk reaction or maybe an uneducated reaction to say F1 is not a sport because I really didn't know how much goes into it. And now looking at it, I obviously it's an entertainment thing. There's physical exertion that is involved, and there's a skill level and athleticism in that hand-eye coordination and all the stuff that goes into it. So, again, I think across the board, there's a lot of people that question that, but I think most people question whether something is a sport or not is because they don't fully understand it. That's just my take.
Yeah, you mentioned one word that I did before as well, but skill. I think that that's a big one. Everybody's in all these different sports and everything like that.
But physical skill,
I know, but
physical,
everybody's trying to hone their skill and
yes,
hone their craft and hone it. And I think when you say physical, you're talking athleticism. I
muscle memory.
muscle memory. I
That's every.
understand. Well, riding is one of the biggest muscle memory type of sports. Formula race car driving, like I was actually watching, and I've given members of my team who are very very heavily involved in the NASCAR racing. Right, a lot of our
Yes,
team members
yes,
have family members that are NASCAR drivers, and it's been in their blood forever. But so, like, I've actually, it's funny. Like, I always joked with them that I thought like NASCAR was kind of like a joke. All they do is go in a. But I was watching the
yeah,
Daytona 500 the other day, and thinking to myself, watching these guys travel at an average of 190 miles an hour around an oval. The second they flinch their hand in one direction, they go flying
yes,
into the wall and crash. Like
for
they're
sure.
traveling at 190 miles an hour within inches of each other. Like,
Yes,
can you imagine the tension that those guys are having, just praying that somebody doesn't come slamming into them and they go flying over the, like, so
hmm,
when you talk about muscle memory and that kind of hand, brain, eye coordination, like
yes,
that is athleticism to me, not just because they're not football players running into people like barbarians, but
yes,
they're honing a skill that at a certain level you and I couldn't do.
correct.
And so, when you talk about like Formula One, like this guy Max Verstappen, who's the best in the
Hmm.
world now, um, all these kind of things that I think this year, me knowing being educated when it comes to Formula One, I think it's going to be really telling the outcome of this year because people in Formula One are kind of on a level playing field. You have Lewis Hamilton in a Ferrari, of McLaren, Lando Norris, you have Max Verstappen in a Red Bull, and like these three guys, I believe this year are just going to be absolutely duking it out, and we'll see pretty much who's the best. If somebody's got an inferior car, if they can still pull out, and everybody thinks Max can because his skill level. And the funny thing is people always joke with him that he plays internet
Yeah.
esports and
Yeah.
driving too much. But the funny thing is he's like, I'm honing my craft
Yes.
for 12 hours a day. And you guys are laughing at me that I consume all my time, but I'm practicing
It's safer training for
the
sure.
entire time. And his
Yeah.
hand-eye coordination and those simulators and everything simulate for him the exact,
Feel.
instances that their brain has to kick in and react, and reaction times and all that. I want to read another quote before we get to the equestrian side of it, because I think the equestrian is definitely one of those sports that
Yes.
it's a sport, but that is where there's a lot of conversation about what it is, how it is, and whatever. But I saw this the other day, which also made me really want to do this topic. Quote, PGA Tour golf tournament, okay? Golf Association posted this yesterday, actually, on their Instagram account. And maybe you can guess who this quote came from, okay?
Okay.
From a competitive standpoint, to me, it is the hardest sport to play. It's like playing in a mirror, and you're battling yourself consistently to try to get perfection. This is the hardest sport to play. Who do you think said that?
Tiger Woods?
No, but I think you're going to be shocked. The greatest athlete of all time, Michael Jordan.
Okay. I thought we were looking in the golf.
So I don't think anybody can argue Michael Jordan's probably
for sure
the best, or if not, top three athletes, physical, all of the above of all time. And he's sitting, look, it's on my phone. Oop,
I believe
I don't want to share my posting that this is, from a competitive standpoint, to me, it's the hardest sport to play. It's like playing in a mirror, and you're battling yourself consistently to try to get perfection. And it's so true. Like,
but again, it's how it's, again, this, is it a sport can be described in so many different ways. And obviously Michael Jordan, of all people, knows what a sport is. But then again, golf,
you're just thinking that because you could have a heavier set person, or you could have somebody that's not maybe athletically as inclined as Tiger Woods.
No, I just think
Michael
that the
Jordan
different sports require different skill, you're using different skills that maybe you're not using all of the sport defined things, but you're more so focused on a couple, which doesn't change whether it's a sport or not. But I think they're just different, because mentally golf is probably one of the most, mentally taxing sport of them all.
Look at like a John Daly versus a Tiger Woods. People make that comparison all the time because he's bigger, and then Tiger's this ultra fit kind of guy, and Michael Jordan. But you look at it's funny because a lot of pro athletes right now, Steph Curry, Josh Allen, like these guys, Tony Romo, like these guys that play the strongest physical sports, their favorite other sport to play is golf. I think because it does just that. Like, it literally is a mind game, and you have to physically connect the thoughts in your mind, the accuracy, which is major, swing calculations, distance, like all these things. And it probably I would imagine it makes them better at their sports, because intellectually it makes them think in different avenues.
I think that's one of the biggest differentiators in athletes is, your mental capacity and your intelligence of the sport and how that works. And I think that separates and defines most athletes. I say that because Tom Brady was just talking on the Super Bowl, and he was talking about people comparing him to Patrick Mahomes. He didn't go straight at him and say, you know what, he doesn't compare to me or not. He just said, you know what separates me from everybody else? is how much
Yeah, I
I
saw.
study, how much mental abilities I put into the sport. He's like, I may not be the most athletic or most, comparative to, the quarterbacks of this era that can scramble and do all the stuff. He's like, he knew. He's like, I'm not that person. But I'll tell you, I outstudy every
Yeah. When
person
he was
on that
walking to the
field.
line of scrimmage, he knew exactly what the
He
defense
knew
was going to do, and
exactly.
he knew where he was going
Yeah.
to throw the ball. And if they picked up on it, then he switched it.
Yeah.
I remember hearing that. It's true.
Yeah.
So for me, the definition of sport is really evolving, I think, into more of, or equally as so, a mental space as it is a physical. And when you think of it that way, your definition of sport changes. And the interesting thing about, I love that quote from the PGA Tour, because like you're
Yes.
literally talking the best athlete of all time across any sport there ever was. And
Yes.
he's saying that golf he thinks is the hardest, which I would agree. I mean, the cool thing about golf, which I think is a little bit like equestrian, honestly, in the regard of you have the people at the very top that are, super athletic. I know a lot of the top riders in the world, top 10, top 20, top 50 riders in the world. Like, I mean, they are athletes. I mean, they go to the gym twice a day. They're
Hmm.
working on maybe not big heavy weights, but they're working on their balance. All of those kind of things are just critical. Their core strength, stuff like
Yes.
that, which is very similar to golf. And, um, body control and all of those little
Repetitious
physical
stuff. Yeah.
memory, muscle memory stuff. And I think that when you're talking about equestrian, it's also such a mind game. I mean, it's
For
funny
sure.
because it takes so many years to um to hone the craft. Like I rode from when I was 6 years old until, let's just call it now. And um you're constantly battling your skill level versus your performance in the arena. And I think the best of the best are just like any sport in tennis. The training of, show jumping, it takes forever. Like my son is, he's, like I said, he's 4 years old. He's walking around on the pony over and over and over again every day. And then little by little trotting, working on all the balance things and the aids and how to speak to the horse. I think working with a horse is very similar. Everybody always compares it to like race car driving because you
Mhm.
have to learn the mechanisms, with the horse. And the interesting thing about a horse is every horse has their own personality. Every time you get on a new horse, you have to adapt. You have to learn the little cues that horse has, and the quirks and the little intricate things that horse presents. And over time it's really difficult to do. And I think like anything else, Ronnie was, I think, considering equestrian as a hobby, because yes, there's a lot of
Yeah.
people that do it as a hobby, but there's also a lot of people that drive race cars as a hobby. There's a lot
But
of
let's
people
be
that
fair, that goes with every sport.
everything. You play basketball. Like I was playing
You play
basketball last night
softball, it
with
doesn't.
crew at
Yeah.
7 p.m. on the basketball court. Like that's a hobby. We're playing around. But
Yes.
when you're talking about sport, you look at the top level and you're like, are these guys competing at this and making it a profession and making it a sport? And that's a lot of things. I mean, I'd say so for me, I do think horseback riding is absolutely a sport. I think competing at horse shows is a sport. I know my kid, whether he's 6, 7, 8, 9 years old in the future, and he walks into that show ring, if he ever gets to that point, I know mentally he's considering it a sport. I mean,
Yes.
do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So, absolutely. Like, I kind of take offense to the hobby aspect of it, because anytime you're working that hard at something to improve, to gain a connection with your horse and everything like that, you're doing a sport.
Yes.
And I think that's a tough one for me to get around, that it's just a hobby. But at every level you do something, you're still doing a version of the sport in order to get better, and it takes a lot of mental bandwidth, physical activity, and skill in order to do it. Like, Mike, I've seen you
Yeah.
hop on a horse. You don't ride.
Yes. No.
Not so easy,
No. No, for sure.
and it would take you years and years and years and years and years and years. It would probably take you 15 years to get to a big level. It just
Yeah.
it's tough, and I don't know. Like, that's a tough conversation for me to have, because I think, like anything else, it's a sport. No,
Yeah. No, it's physical skill. It's precision. It's strategy.
balance, core
And
strength.
it's athleticism. I mean, there's so much that goes into it for sure. And I think with every sport, I find that the athletes that put the most into it are usually the ones that excel, right? And I think if you show jumping, let me ask you a question. You touched about the training aspect, the physical training, the mental training that goes into show jumping. Do you think that separates the athletes that are currently on the top of the sport at this point?
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Because I can give you an example. Years and years and years ago, I can only speak for myself.
Mhm.
I had what I felt was, I mean, regardless of what any other buddy's opinion was, one of the best horses in the world. I still think that. I think he had injuries earlier in his life. Had he not had certain injuries earlier as a young horse, I think he would have been one of the best horses in the world. And I do think I was good enough to get him there, because I never had the ability I never had a horse of his quality, his carefulness, his scope, his want to do it and drive to do
Mhm.
it and heart. So I really believe that he could have been one of the best horses in the world, but later in his career, he couldn't jump FEI because he needed a little bit of help and medication to do it. So because of those early career injuries, but
Yes.
when that horse his name was Lacarolas, he's retired now in Kentucky. When that horse was 8, 9, 10 years old, I struggled the most with my career during those
Okay.
years. And it was not because, and I was the fittest I ever was in my life. I took it seriously. I trained like I never had before in my life to get the most results and best results out of that horse at the highest level. And I was my own worst enemy. No
Okay.
joke. I started
Yeah.
seeing, I needed to start seeing a sports psychologist, because the mental aspect in connection with the physical and everything like that wasn't there for me. I put
Mhm.
too much pressure on myself to succeed because I thought he was so good, and achieve my lifelong goals of making Nations Cups and the U.S. team and winning major 5-star Grand Prix and everything like that. And it really, really affected me big
Yeah.
time. I mean, a good 2 years of that horse's career, I would have one or two down in a major Grand Prix, and I would just beat myself up, and it was a domino effect. I couldn't figure it out. And that's
Yeah.
where the connection, like with the sport of golf, in regard of the mental game, is just as big as the physical. Because
Yes.
in show jumping, you in order to be the best and the best of the best, or compete with the best of the best, you
Mhm.
have to have both.
Yes.
And in order to have consistency week in and week out, which in the sport of show jumping is so critical, I do think every once in a while somebody can have a great week that maybe shouldn't win a major Grand Prix and win it. But
Yes.
the best of the best are
Consistent.
consistently,
Yeah.
mentally with it. And everybody goes through these waves. And I think more
Yeah.
than anything in a comparison, it's actually golf that is probably the best comparison to show jumping, in my opinion, not necessarily race car driving, because
Yeah.
it is my experience was, it was such a mental game. Once I started working with a sports psychologist that was amazing, I loved.
Mhm.
She was a very prominent sports psychologist in the sport, and it really changed. It took me a year. It took me a year to get over the hump. From that year on, after working with a sports psychologist, getting over that hump of those pressures and everything like that,
Yes.
I had like one really good year at the FEI level, international level before, the wear and tear on the horse's body just because of the injuries he had earlier in his life at 7 years old. He couldn't keep competing at an international level. I was lucky enough to make a Nations Cup, and I lived out those dreams and everything because of his skill. But from that
Yes.
point on in his career, regardless of whether he was doing international or FEI, international FEI level or national level, that horse jumped 85% clear rounds in a Grand Prix level because he was that good. He just couldn't do it at the biggest level because of his previous injuries and couldn't do it international level all the way up until 16 years old. I mean, I'd say that horse, and I don't know if people realize it, but he was unbelievable. Like, I literally knew him like the back of my hand. He knew me. Once we got past that mental hurdle,
As a team, right?
yeah,
You guys were a team.
the results, like, I think we were top 6 in pretty much almost every Grand Prix we walked in, literally, minus a handful. So, like, that mental to go along with the physical to make it to the top of the sport is like, is everything. That's why I think the best comparison I can make is golf. And the interesting thing is I'd say these are probably two of the sports that are the most in question of whether just because an 80-year-old man can go out and play golf, like, doesn't mean it's not a sport, like, yeah, they're not competing at it. They're not doing it and producing results like the best of the best are. But that's like any other sport out there in the world, no?
Well, for sure. I think the strategy is one of the biggest things that is involved in equestrian sport, primarily show jumping. And as you mentioned, I didn't grow up jumping horses. I've dabbled with it and tried to train, so I understand. But I do have a profound appreciation for show jumping and definitely enjoy it and appreciate it and think it's a sport that requires lots of training. So I do appreciate it. And I was just going to go back to the F1 and what I find defines a lot of these sports is age, and I feel like, equestrian show jumping, maybe not as much, but most sports, if you look, like you said, Hamilton compared to Verstappen, you look at all these sports and usually they're young people's, they're professional athletes. And I hate to say it, I'm getting old, and your athleticism declines, so that really shows me that the younger people seem to be more athletic and a better athlete. So that can differentiate to show you that, like, listen, not everybody can do this, and definitely age plays a factor. So that defines how much skill is needed to be at the top of your game. Why do you think in show jumping that isn't as much of a factor?
I mean, because I think experience and mental strength
Yes. Yeah.
play a major factor.
Yes.
I think the younger you are, and I don't want to offend anybody, but the younger you are, the more mentally, I don't know what the right word is, weak or unstable or not
Immature or
not experienced,
not educated. Yeah.
not
Yeah.
experienced enough to handle every variable out there.
Yes.
And that's why every time you walk in the ring, just like in a race car, every time you walk into a race or every time you go back on track, you're incrementally learning different experiences that go into your mental Rolodex of knowledge. And that's why this sport is so beautiful. I mean, it's a sport of longevity. It's a sport that women and men can compete against each other on a level playing field. It's a sport that if you're 40 years old and you're in prime shape, you're probably in on the prime timeline to get the most out of your career.
Yes.
Not when you're 22, and it's a sport that, yes, you can do it until you're late 60s. And there are those anomalies out there that do it 60s, 70s and still compete. I think you see in those individuals that, the results aren't as consistent as those, 30 to 50-year-olds, because that's really the window, I think, that is the prime experience level, physical level, everything for this sport. But also Lewis Hamilton, like, he's older. I don't know how old he is.
Yes.
I think he's like 40, something like that, So, okay, and when you get to that level, Tom Brady, there you have certain group of individuals that have this, like, I'll call it a screw loose, that have like
Yes.
this end level of competitiveness that they'll sacrifice anything for it, and it's hard to keep that level up. For me, obviously I organize horse shows now. I love this business more than running an equestrian business, so that's why I switched. But my level of motivation as well,
Yes.
dwindled. It did.
Family distractions. You
Yeah, but
have,
it did.
you start family
Yeah,
and
I want to have a family. Like, I love my family more than anything. Michelle and the kids and everything. Like, those are my main priorities. So switching my profession in this industry was pretty important because of those other factors. But it also stems from my lack of motivation to keep doing the sport at that level as well. So, when I look at Lewis Hamilton, I'm curious to see whether he picks it up now that he's with Ferrari again, because when you're doing something for so long, it's like, and you've won so much, what's the new
yes.
challenge ahead of you? And now he's with a new team, so that's why he needed to do it. So hopefully he gets that motivation again. And I'm sure his skill level is noted as probably the best of all time at the current time because he's won so much. But all that plays a factor into it. And I think, if anything, equestrian, if other people playing other sports hear this, I don't know, they get mad at me, but like, there's there could be an argument that there are more variables in the equestrian sport that go into other sports.
I don't disagree. I mean,
I mean,
there's
you're
a lot of
working with a
factors.
living, breathing animal that could weigh 1,000, 1,200 pounds underneath you, that
Yes.
has a mind of its own. What other sport do you encounter those variables and have to deal with those variables? And
Yeah.
those horses are just as much athletes as the riders. Well, more, I would say. The general
Yes.
routine of working those horses are working every single day, especially at the high
But
performance level.
let's also look at, show jumping compared to other sports. Other sports, let's go back to golf because you compared them. Those golfers go and play that course maybe 2-3 times, prior to, and they've played Augusta numerous times. So they know what to expect. Yes, the weather, there's a lot of other factors that may change. But you look at equestrian show jumping from an athlete standpoint, both horse and rider, every night, it'd be very rare that they jump the same track. So you're going in there and competing. You don't get an opportunity to practice that round. You have to go straight in. Same with racing. They go on the same track, so they know the track. But show jumping is really, really separated in that you're going in there and you're jumping a different track every night, and you have to do it perfectly, not having been able to practice it prior to. So it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. I think the key is in the difference of like what Ronnie was saying, and the point he was trying to make is, of course, a lot of people are doing it as their hobby, but I think you also have to say even though it may be their hobby, they're still competing and participating in a sport. Are there any sports out there now that we've, you and I have talked this conversation into, the deep depths of so many times? We probably had this talk like 30 times, but like the only sports that come to mind that I would question of whether it's a sport, and then again we can go through a bullet point of whether it is or it isn't, because there's skill level, there's mental experience, all of that, physical exertion, is esports. That one's a little on borderline for me.
But you just touched on Verstappen, what he's going through. So having the same,
it helps his physical. I think it helps his mental and physical
mentally.
for
Yeah,
the G forces and the Formula One. Like he has to have the physical also though to go do his sport.
correct.
So that's where that's the one thing I struggle. I mean, some people have called playing cards and poker a sport.
Yeah. Cornhole. There you go. It's on ESPN. Cornhole.
Cornhole,
What about darts? So
bowling.
there's lots of them. I mean, those are just a few that I'm like, I shake my head, but they are entertaining. They require strategy.
Skill.
Um, there's little pieces. Again, I think
Pool.
you don't
Playing
really have
pool.
to define whether it's a sport or not. I think different strokes for different folks, right? If it's something you enjoy, or somebody else enjoys, let them do it. I mean, it
Well,
doesn't
that's
mean I have to watch
you
it.
know what just came to my head though? Another word differing a sport. So Ronnie used the word hobby.
Hmm.
Um, game. Is a game a
Yes,
sport?
it's defined. It's one of
Show
the
jumping's definitely, and hunter jumper and riding is definitely not a game. Like you,
no
so that helps
team.
my analogy in regard to um, is it a sport? And that solidifies it in my mind as yes. When I think of the sports or the games you just described, um, I consider those games, not sports. I'm gonna look it up. Let's see what this is.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Let's
this may
talk
be a
to
hot
Siri.
topic, but also if we look at hunters, I personally think hunters are a sport, and I look at how much that has to go into preparing for to go compete in the hunter ring,
Yeah, I'm
and
glad you brought that up.
how perfect you need to be and the precision that goes into it and how subjective it is. I mean, there's a lot of pressure there to go in there and be in the perfect position, jump the perfect jump, do all this stuff. So I think it requires, quite a bit to go in and
I think
compete.
yeah, I'm really almost forgot to bring that up. That's good you did. Yeah, I mean hunters are definitely considered differently when the sport conversation comes up, but I think all the same factors go into it. It is scored differently. I think show jumping is scored more unsubjectively, and
Yes.
hunters are subjective.
Yes.
So I think it's a little bit different in that regard. And a lot of people, anytime you have a subjective analysis of a sport, sometimes it's maybe put into question of whether it is a sport or not. I hope moving forward in our sport, to be honest, and again, this could cause controversy, but I hope hunters figure out a way to make it less subjective. And I think
Hmm.
that that would help their case. But yes, of course, just as much goes into it, and especially just as much goes into it at doing a very high level or being extremely good at it. So,
Yes.
absolutely, it's in the same conversation. I think there's a lot of work to be done. You know that. I've talked about this, and I've been pretty controversial, honestly, in our horse shows of trying new things and dabbling in different things
Hmm.
in the hunter world. But I think that they've got a lot of work to do of revamping it a little bit to make it feel a little bit more sporty than others.
Yes.
I got the definition here between games and
Okay.
sports. Let's hear it. Okay. Games and sports are very similar. A game is a physical or mental activity or contest that has rules and that people do for pleasure. A
Hmm.
sport is a contest or game in which people do certain physical activities according to a specific set of rules and compete against each other. The difference is subtle. So it says has rules and that people do for pleasure is a game, and a sport is something that they compete against each other with a specific set of physical rules. So yeah, I mean there's definitely but there was no. I
No,
guess
it's
a
very
game it
broad.
can be a yeah, it's tough when differentiating these things, but I think this is like overarching like a really important topic because in our world of show jumping or hunter jumper world equestrian, um, we're always trying to find that balance of what connects to outside people also. I think in those sort of things are difficult. People that love agriculture, people that love horses in general, because once you have it in your blood, you can't get it out. They're in our sport and they watch it and they see it and they feel it and they love it. I've always been a big proponent of like continuing to cater to the people that love it already, not necessarily the outside world, because I think it's pretty misunderstood.
Agreed.
Yeah, and then I think it all comes down to whether it's a sport or not. I think it absolutely is a sport. I think Ronnie opened up a can of worms a little bit in my head, and in defense of the sport that we work in, and love. I wanted you on this episode, Mike, because you were so differing in opinion the last time we had this conversation of whether horseback riding was a sport, whether golf was a sport, whether race car driving was a sport. I don't know what's happened to you.
No. Oh, I don't. I think I've always, from the equestrian side, I don't think I ever questioned that. Formula One, I'll give you, I definitely question.
Well, you said riding in Formula One or race car driving because you thought that the thing that was taking the most exertion was either the horse or the car.
Well, I think in show jumping it's both, but
both take teams.
Yeah, no, I don't recall ever. Show jumping to me I've always considered a sport, but F1 I definitely argued about, and I've softened on it. I think that's with everything in life. You have to educate yourself, and if you don't, then it's going to be very difficult. But draw a hard line. I think, looking at all these, like I just said, cornhole, if somebody chooses to play cornhole and they mentally think it's a sport, I mean, who am I to tell them that it's not? So if that motivates them, let them go at it. I'm not here to argue that. So I may not choose to watch it or respect it, but that's up to me.
Breakdancing, that was in the Olympics.
Breakdancing, well, that was a real flop. But wow. Who knew I had a chance? How about curling?
In the Olympics.
How about curling?
I don't know anything.
I still have a chance to go to the Olympics. I have a goal.
I don't know anything about curling, so.
Well,
I've seen
there's not
it,
much to know.
Yeah.
You throw a rock and you sweep. So there is skill
you
involved.
Know better than me. You're Canadian. Don't they do that up in the ice areas?
Well, everywhere. America does it, but it involves beer drinking, and the beer drinking league, Americans still, won gold. So it requires skill, but then again, I think you could do it at any age. So again, is it a sport? Well, it must be. It's in the Olympics.
Yeah. Well, this is such an awesome conversation, and we definitely want to hear from everybody out there tuning in and listening what their opinion is. Please, as we're posting short clips and everything on YouTube and Instagram, we want you guys to interact with us. Tell us what your opinion is of whether equestrian is a sport or isn't a sport, and also weigh in on what other sports is your opinion of whether they are sports or not. I think anything that involves athleticism, skill, exertion, balance, mental awareness, all of those things are definitely considered sports, and is definitely a hot topic. So we really appreciate you guys tuning into our HorseShow 360 podcast. Every week, new episodes dropping Monday at 11 a.m. So keep tuning in. This was episode 17, I believe, and is horseback riding or equestrianism a sport, and comparing those to all others. We really appreciate you all tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, HorseShow 360 Podcast, and tune into the audio on all your podcast platforms. Thank you guys again for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.